The pain hits before my eyes even open, a deep burning line across my ribs that makes me suck in air through my teeth. My hands close on something cold and smooth, not a blanket, not a bed rail, something like metal that hums faintly under my fingers. I force my eyes open, and the first thing I see is a ceiling that is not a ceiling at all. A curved surface, glowing pale green, pulsing gently, like it is breathing with me. I am not on my ship. I am not anywhere I recognize. My name is Ethan Marsh, and the last thing I remember clearly is the shudder of my shuttle tearing apart around me during an emergency jump, alarms screaming, my co-pilot shouting coordinates that made no sense, and then a flash of white that swallowed everything. Now there is no shuttle. There is a narrow room with walls that shift color slowly from green to a soft blue, and there is a creature standing 3 feet from my bed, watching me, with 4 black eyes set in a face that is somewhere between an insect and something almost gentle. I try to sit up. My whole side screams in protest, and I grit my teeth and push through it anyway, because lying still while confused has never once felt like the right choice to me. "Do not move," the creature says. The voice comes out flat and mechanical, clearly passing through some kind of translator device clipped near her throat. But underneath the mechanical tone there is something like alarm. "Your wound is not sealed. You will reopen it." "Where am I?" I ask, ignoring her advice completely, and swinging my legs toward the edge of the bed. She steps forward fast, faster than I expect for something with such a slender frame, and places 2 long fingers against my chest to stop me. Her skin is a pale gray, faintly reflective, almost like wet stone under starlight. "You are aboard the medical vessel, Corvin Rest. You were recovered from wreckage 11 hours ago. I am Ishka. I am your assigned care provider. You suffered internal bleeding, 3 fractured ribs, and a collapsed section of your left lung. You should not be conscious yet, and you certainly should not be attempting to stand." I look down at myself. There is a thin silver mesh taped across my ribs, faintly glowing, and beneath it, I can feel my own body doing something strange. A tight, itching heat that I recognize distantly as healing, just far too fast to make sense. "How long was I out?" I ask. 11 hours, Ishka repeats slowly, like she is testing whether I understood her the first time. "You are speaking clearly. You are tracking movement with your eyes. Your motor coordination is intact. This should not be possible given the trauma your body has sustained." "I feel fine," I tell her, which is not entirely true, because my side is on fire and my head is pounding. But compared to what she is describing, fine feels like the right word. Her 4 eyes narrow slightly, and for a moment she just stares at me, the way you might stare at a puzzle piece that refuses to fit no matter which way you turn it. "Your species designation is human," she says. "Correct?" "That's me." "This is my first time treating one of your kind directly." She says it carefully, like she is choosing each word from a very short list of safe options. "I read your intake file before you regained consciousness. I did not fully believe it." "Believe what?" She does not answer right away. Instead, she moves to a panel beside my bed, and a series of glowing symbols rise into the air above it, shapes I cannot read, colors shifting from calm blue to a sharper amber as she touches through them. Whatever she is looking at makes the muscles around her mouth tighten. "Your pain readings," she says finally. "According to the sensors woven into that mesh on your chest, you are currently experiencing what my species would classify as severe, unmanaged pain. The kind that would leave most patients unable to speak in full sentences." I shrug, immediately regret it because my ribs remind me exactly why that was a bad idea, and press my lips together until the sharp edge of it passes. "It's not that bad." "It is that bad," Ishka says, and there is something almost sharp in her translated voice now, an edge of frustration. "The readings do not lie, and yet you sit here, discussing it with me, as though we are talking about the weather outside a viewport." Before I can answer, the door to my room slides open with a soft hiss, and another figure steps halfway inside, another Veltari, taller than Ishka, with markings along her jaw that look almost like faded silver paint. She is not wearing the same uniform as Ishka. Her badge, if that is what the small glowing symbol on her collar is, looks different. A different color. A different ward, maybe. "I was told there was a human patient on this floor," the newcomer says, eyes locking onto me immediately, with an intensity that makes the hair on my arms rise. Ishka turns, and something passes between the two of them, a quick, sharp exchange in a language that isn't translated for me, clipped and fast. The newcomer's eyes never leave my face the entire time. "You should not be here," Ishka finally says to her, switching back to the translated tongue, and there is something almost embarrassed in how she says it. "This patient is under observation. Non-assigned staff are not permitted." "I only wanted to see," the other nurse says, and even through the flat translator voice, I can hear something that sounds uncomfortably close to fascination. The reports from the intake team were difficult to believe. "You have seen him," Ishka says, stepping slightly, almost protectively between us. "Now please return to your ward." The taller nurse lingers a moment longer, her 4 eyes tracing over me like she is trying to memorize something, then finally retreats, the door sliding shut behind her with a soft click that somehow feels louder than it should. I look at Ishka. "Friend of yours?" "I do not know her," Ishka says, and there is something tight in her posture now, something guarded. She works 2 decks below. She has no reason to be here. Then why was she? Ishka doesn't answer immediately. She moves back toward the glowing panel, adjusting something, her fingers moving with practiced precision, even as her attention seems to drift somewhere else entirely, somewhere she isn't telling me about. "You should rest," she says instead, which is not an answer at all. I let it go, mostly because my body is making it very clear that it intends to shut down again whether I agree to it or not, a heavy pull behind my eyes that I recognize as exhaustion finally catching up to whatever strange resilience got me this far. But right before I drift off, I hear the door hiss open one more time, and I catch just a sliver of another voice, another Veltari, asking Ishka in careful, curious tones whether the human in this room really is the one everyone on the lower decks has been talking about. I do not hear Ishka's answer. Sleep pulls me under before I can. When I wake again, the light in the room has shifted to a dimmer amber, something like their version of night cycle lighting, and Ishka is still there, seated at a small console near the wall, though she is not working. She is simply watching me, her 4 eyes catching the low light strangely. "You stayed," I say, my voice rough. "It is my duty." "Is it your duty to watch me sleep, or was there something else on your mind?" Her mandibles click together softly, a small, involuntary motion I am starting to realize might be the Veltari equivalent of a nervous habit. "There have been 4 visits to this room since you arrived, 4 members of staff from other departments, each finding some reason to walk past, to glance in, to ask questions about your condition that had nothing to do with their assigned duties." I push myself up slightly against the pillow, ignoring the twinge in my side, more interested now than I am tired. 4? 4 that I have personally witnessed, Ishka says. There may have been others while I was occupied elsewhere. Why? She studies me for a long moment, the amber light catching the pale gray of her skin, and when she finally speaks, her translated voice carries something I did not expect from her before now. Something almost like unease, dressed up as simple curiosity. "Why does every nurse on this ship suddenly want to see you, human?" She asks. "What is in your file that has spread through this vessel faster than any medical update I have ever witnessed?" I open my mouth to answer that I have absolutely no idea, and I mean it, because as far as I know, I am just a pilot who got unlucky during a jump. But something in the way she asks the question, something in the careful, guarded weight behind it, tells me this is not a small thing. This is not idle gossip among bored medical staff. Something about me, something in that file she mentioned, has already started to travel through this ship like a story people cannot stop repeating to each other. And I am about to find out exactly what that story is. I do not get an answer that first night. Ishka excuses herself before I can push further, claiming she has other patients to check on, and I am left alone in the dim amber light, with nothing but the low hum of the ship and my own thoughts for company. Sleep takes me again, deeper this time, and when I wake the light has shifted back to that pale morning blue. The first thing I notice is that my side hurts less. Not gone, but duller. More like a bruise than a wound. I lift the edge of the silver mesh taped across my ribs, and see the skin beneath has already knit together into a thin pink line, faster than any injury I have ever had before, though I suppose that might just be whatever medical technology they are using on me. The second thing I notice is the door sliding open before I have even fully sat up, and it is not Ishka. A different Veltari steps inside, shorter than Ishka, with a rounder face and markings along her jaw that curve like small waves. She freezes the moment she sees me awake, 4 eyes going wide, and for a second, neither of us says anything. "You are the human," she finally says, her translator giving the words a strange breathless quality. "Last I checked," I answer. "I was told to bring a diagnostic scanner to Bay 6, she says, holding up a small device that looks nothing like what I imagine a scanner should look like, more like a smooth stone with a soft light inside it. "This is Bay 4. "Easy mistake," I say, though we both clearly know it is not. She lingers near the door, her eyes tracing over the mesh on my ribs, the readouts glowing faintly on the wall panel beside my bed, and even over me directly, in a way that makes me feel less like a patient and more like an exhibit. "Is it true," she asks slowly, "that your kind heals faster than the readings should allow?" Before I can respond, Ishka appears in the doorway behind her, and the sharpness in her voice this time needs no translator to understand the tone, even if I cannot parse every word. The shorter nurse straightens immediately, mutters something that sounds like an apology, and slips past Ishka out into the corridor. "That is the 6th, Ishka says once the door closes, more to herself than to me. "6th what?" "6th staff member, who has found an excuse to visit this room, since you were brought aboard." She moves to the panel beside my bed, and begins reviewing something, though I notice her attention keeps drifting back toward the door, like she expects another visitor at any moment. None of them have any legitimate reason to be here. None of them are assigned to this ward. "Maybe I'm just interesting," I offer, trying for lightness, though the persistent flicker of unease in Ishka's posture is starting to seep into me as well. "You are the first human this vessel has ever treated," she says. That alone would explain some curiosity. But this is not simple curiosity, Ethan Marsh. This is something else. It is the first time she has used my name, and something about hearing it in that flat translated voice makes this all feel suddenly more real, less like a strange dream I will wake up from. "Then tell me what it is," I say. She hesitates, her mandibles clicking together in that same nervous rhythm from before, and for a moment, I think she might actually explain everything. Instead, she straightens, composes herself, and says, "I am not permitted to speculate on rumors. I can only tell you what I have personally observed." Then observe out loud. I'm listening. She studies me for a long moment, weighing something behind those 4 dark eyes, and finally moves closer, lowering her voice as though the walls themselves might be listening. "There is a device in my ear," she says, touching a small silver bead near the base of one antenna. "It is a translator implant, standard for all medical staff who interact with off-world patients. It also carries a general communication channel, used for staff coordination across the ship." "Okay. For the past 2 days, that channel has not been silent regarding you," she says. "I have heard fragments, words I do not fully understand the context of, but words that keep repeating. Tolerance threshold, pain suppression anomaly, behavioral non-compliance." She pauses. "These are not casual terms, Ethan Marsh. These are terms used in medical case studies, serious ones." A cold feeling settles somewhere behind my ribs that has nothing to do with my injury. "Case studies about me?" "I do not know," Ishka admits. "I have only been assigned to your care for 2 days. But the way staff speak of you, the way they find reasons to walk past this room, the way even Nurse Doran, who has served on this vessel for 11 cycles and rarely speaks to anyone outside her own department, made a special effort to see you herself this morning." She shakes her head slowly. "This is not normal behavior. Not even for a first contact patient." I think back to the shorter nurse who mistakenly wandered into the wrong bay, the taller one from the night before, with the silver markings along her jaw, both of them staring at me like I was something out of a story they had already heard secondhand. "You said case studies," I say slowly. "Are you telling me there have been other humans treated on Veltari ships before me?" Ishka's eyes flick toward the door, then back to me, and I realize she is checking whether we are truly alone before she answers. "There have been 3 documented incidents," she says quietly, "all predating my assignment here. All involving human patients treated aboard Veltari or allied medical vessels during early contact operations." "What happened?" I do not have full access to those files, she says. They are restricted beyond my clearance level. But fragments of them circulate informally among medical staff, the way certain stories do, passed nurse to nurse, department to department, growing stranger with each retelling. She pauses again, choosing her next words with obvious care. It is said that in each of those 3 incidents, the human patient behaved in ways that defied every model my species has for how an injured, medically compromised patient should act. Defied how? I do not know the details, she says, and for the first time since I woke up, I hear something that sounds almost like frustration, directed at herself, at the limits of what she is allowed to know. That is precisely why staff keep finding reasons to walk past this room, Ethan Marsh. Because you are, as far as any of them are concerned, a living continuation of a story they have only ever heard in fragments, and every one of them wants to see for themselves whether the 4th chapter matches the first 3. I sit with that for a long moment, the low hum of the ship filling the silence between us, and I find myself wondering, with a strange mix of curiosity and something closer to dread, exactly what those first 3 humans did that would leave an entire medical staff whispering about it cycles later. Can you find out more, I ask finally, about those other cases? Ishka's 4 eyes narrow slightly, and I can see her weighing the request, weighing protocol against whatever pull of curiosity has clearly been building in her since the moment she first read my intake file. It would require accessing records above my clearance, she says. It is not something I am permitted to do casually. But you could. She does not answer that directly, which I am beginning to learn is its own kind of answer with her. Instead, she turns back to the panel, reviewing my vitals again, though I notice her fingers move a little slower than before, a little more distracted. Rest, she says instead. Your body still requires it, regardless of how little pain you claim to feel. I let the subject drop, mostly because pushing further clearly is not going to move her any faster than she is willing to go on her own. But over the following hours, as I drift in and out of a light, uneasy sleep, I notice the pattern continuing exactly as she described. A nurse pauses just outside my door, glancing in, before hurrying on, when she notices me watching. A tall Veltari, in a different uniform color, lingers near the nurse's station down the corridor, close enough that I can see him through the transparent wall panel, his 4 eyes fixed unmistakably on my room, for far longer than casual interest would explain. By the time evening cycle lighting dims the room again, I have counted 11 separate visitors, none of them assigned to my care, all of them finding some reason, however thin, to pass close enough to look. Ishka returns as the lights shift, carrying a small tray, with something that smells vaguely medicinal, and sets it beside my bed without a word. But this time, when she sits, she does not immediately busy herself with the console, she simply looks at me, her 4 eyes steady, something decided behind them that was not there before. I made a request this afternoon, she says, to access the archived files from the first documented human patient case. My request has not yet been approved. But I did learn one thing, from a colleague who worked that case herself, many cycles ago, before she transferred to this vessel. Ishka pauses, and I can tell she is choosing whether to continue, even as the words are already leaving her. She told me that the human in that first case was brought in with injuries the medical team believed would require immediate, extensive sedation, and days of confinement to stabilize. And within 6 hours, Ishka says slowly, he had removed his own monitoring equipment, left his assigned bay, and was found assisting engineering crews with an unrelated system failure 3 decks below, still bleeding through improvised bandages, insisting the whole time that he felt, in his own words, completely fine. The silence that follows sits heavy between us, and I find myself thinking, uncomfortably, that I understand exactly why a story like that would spread through an entire medical staff and never really stop. Because if I am being honest with myself, lying here with ribs that are healing faster than they should, and pain readings the sensors insist are severe, even though I barely notice them anymore, some quiet part of me is already wondering how long it will be before I do something very similar. 2 more days pass before Ishka's request is finally approved, and in that time the visits do not stop, they only grow more creative. A junior technician arrives to check a wall panel that was clearly functioning perfectly well the day before. A senior physician named Doran, the same one Ishka mentioned before, stops by under the guise of a routine cross-department consultation, though her questions have nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with how I am feeling, how much pain I claim to have, whether I have tried to leave my bed again. I have not, mostly because Ishka has taken to physically standing between me and the door whenever she senses I am considering it, which happens more often than I would like to admit. My body keeps healing at a pace that makes the readouts on the wall panel blink amber warnings that nobody seems to fully trust, and the itch to move, to do something other than lie still, grows stronger with every passing hour. It is on the third morning that Ishka finally enters my room, carrying a small dark tablet instead of her usual tray, her 4 eyes bright with something that looks almost nervous. My request was approved, she says without preamble, sitting in the chair beside my bed and setting the tablet on her lap. I have access now to all 3 prior cases. I push myself up carefully, ignoring the twinge in my ribs, more alert than I have felt since waking up on this ship. And? She activates the tablet, and a soft glow rises from its surface, symbols scrolling faster than I can follow, though I notice her eyes moving with practiced speed across information I cannot read at all. For a long moment she says nothing, simply absorbing whatever is displayed there, her mandibles clicking together in that same nervous pattern I have come to recognize. The first case, she says slowly, occurred 9 cycles ago, during an early diplomatic exchange between our 2 species. A human engineer named Daniel Cole was aboard a joint survey vessel when a hull breach caused rapid decompression in one section. He suffered severe internal trauma, frostbite along both hands, and a fractured spine. A fractured spine, I repeat. According to the file, medical staff aboard that vessel believed he would require months of recovery, possibly permanent mobility assistance. Ishka's eyes flick up to me briefly, before returning to the tablet. Instead, within 4 days, he was recorded on internal security systems, moving through restricted maintenance corridors, still wearing his medical restraints partially attached, in order to personally assist with a coolant leak that engineering crews were struggling to contain. Why would he do that? The file includes a transcript of his explanation when questioned afterward. Ishka says, he stated that he understood the risk, that he understood his injuries, and that he did it anyway, because in his words, someone he cared about was in that section of the ship, and he was not willing to simply wait and hope others could handle it. I sit with that for a moment, something uncomfortably familiar settling in my chest. It is not hard to imagine making that same choice. The second case, Ishka continues, occurred 6 cycles ago, aboard a different vessel entirely, one belonging to an allied species, not our own, though the records were shared with our medical network, as part of a broader study into human physiology. A woman named Clara Whitfield, a diplomatic aide, was injured during an attempted hostage situation aboard a transport station. What happened to her? She sustained a puncture wound to her abdomen, along with significant blood loss. Medical staff sedated her for emergency surgery, expecting a straightforward, if serious, procedure. Ishka pauses, scrolling further. According to the file, she regained consciousness during the procedure itself, against every expectation of the sedative dosage administered, and rather than panicking or losing coherence, she calmly informed the surgical team of a critical detail about her attacker's remaining accomplices that she had not yet had the chance to report, information that ultimately allowed station security to prevent a second attack. She woke up mid-surgery, I say slowly, and instead of freaking out, she gave a tactical briefing. That is the account in the file, yes. Ishka's eyes lift to meet mine, something unreadable behind them. The medical team involved noted, and I am translating this as closely as I can, that her heart rate and stress indicators remained within what they considered manageable parameters throughout the entire exchange, despite what should have been overwhelming physical and psychological distress. I let out a slow breath, trying to imagine it, trying to imagine being awake and aware, in the middle of surgery, and choosing, in that moment, to prioritize a warning over the fact that someone was actively operating on you. And the third case, I ask. Ishka is quiet for a long moment this time, longer than before, and when she finally speaks, her translated voice carries a weight that was not present in the first 2 accounts. The third case is the most recent, she says. 2 cycles ago, a soldier named Marcus Doyle, part of a small human peacekeeping detachment, assisting with a border dispute mediation, His unit came under unexpected fire during what was meant to be a routine escort mission. Under fire, I repeat. He sustained multiple injuries, Ishka says, her eyes still fixed on the tablet, though I get the sense she is no longer really reading it, that the words are simply coming from memory now, from whatever briefing accompanied this file. A gunshot wound to his shoulder, shrapnel lacerations along his side, a fractured ankle from the initial explosion that began the engagement. And he kept fighting, I say quietly, already sensing where this is going. For 6 hours, Ishka confirms. According to the medical assessment performed afterward, injuries of that severity, particularly the shoulder wound, combined with significant blood loss, should have rendered him unable to continue any meaningful physical activity within approximately 20 minutes. Our own physiological models certainly predict that outcome for a Veltari sustaining equivalent damage. She sets the tablet down slowly. Instead, he continued to provide cover for his unit, applied a improvised tourniquet to his own leg without assistance, and by the account of the soldiers who served alongside him, did not stop moving, did not stop directing others, until the engagement was fully resolved and every member of his unit was confirmed safe. What happened to him afterward? He collapsed, Ishka says. The moment the immediate danger passed, the moment there was no longer anyone depending on him to keep functioning, his body simply gave out all at once. Medical staff who treated him described it as though some internal mechanism had been holding him together purely through will, and the instant that will was no longer required, the body was finally permitted to fail. The room is quiet for a long moment after that, the low hum of the ship the only sound between us, and I find myself thinking about my own ribs, my own healing wound, the strange itch in my legs to get up and move that has been building since the moment I woke. You understand now, Ishka says finally, why an entire medical staff would not be able to stop discussing a fourth human patient arriving aboard this vessel. 3 prior cases, each one more difficult to explain than the last, and each one involving behavior that fundamentally contradicts everything our species understands about how an injured body is supposed to respond to trauma. I'm not a soldier, I say, or an engineer risking my life for someone trapped in a coolant leak. I'm just a pilot who got unlucky. Perhaps, Ishka says, though something in her tone suggests she does not fully believe that distinction matters as much as I want it to. Do your pain readings, since the moment you arrived, have consistently registered at levels that would leave most patients, of any species I have treated, unable to function normally? And you have spoken to me, calmly, clearly, since the very first moment you woke. I do not have a good answer for that, mostly because I have been quietly wondering the same thing myself, in the back of my mind, ever since Ishka first mentioned the strange readings on that very first day. Can I ask you something? I say instead. Of course. Why does it matter so much to your people? I understand the curiosity. But this feels like more than curiosity. Nurses skipping their assigned duties just to glance through a doorway. A senior physician inventing reasons to visit. That's not normal behavior, even accounting for how strange humans might seem to you. Ishka considers the question carefully, her 4 eyes narrowing slightly in thought, and when she answers, her voice has lost some of its clinical distance, replaced by something more personal, more honest. My species places great value on the preservation of self, she says. It is woven into everything about how we are raised, how we are trained, how our medical systems function. A Veltari, who ignores their own pain, who continues to push their body past what it can safely endure, is not admired for it. They are considered reckless, potentially even unstable. Our entire framework for injury and recovery is built around the assumption that the body's signals of distress exist precisely so that they will be obeyed. And humans don't obey them. Humans, from what I have now read across 4 separate documented cases, including your own, seem to treat those signals as optional information rather than instruction, Ishka says, as something to be weighed against other priorities, rather than followed automatically. To my people, that is almost incomprehensible. It should not function. By every model we have, ignoring pain at that level should result in worsened outcomes, permanent damage, situations far more severe than what these cases describe. But it doesn't. No, Ishka admits. In each of these 4 cases, including yours so far, the outcomes have been, by any reasonable measure, remarkably positive, given the severity of the injuries involved. And that is precisely what unsettles my colleagues so deeply. Something that should not work according to everything we understand about medicine and biology continues to work anyway, every single time a human is involved. I lean back against the pillow, turning all of this over slowly, and for the first time since I woke up on this ship, the strange, persistent parade of curious nurses outside my door does not feel quite as unsettling as it did before. It feels, instead, like I have stumbled into something larger than myself, some quiet, ongoing story about my entire species that has been unfolding one patient at a time, cycle after cycle, long before I ever arrived. Is there a name for it? I ask. Whatever it is your people think is happening to us. Ishka hesitates, and for a moment, I think she might avoid the question entirely. But then she reaches for the tablet again, scrolls briefly, and turns it toward me, though the symbols mean nothing to my eyes. There is a term used informally among the medical staff who have studied these cases, she says. It does not translate perfectly, but the closest approximation would be something like willful override. The idea that your species possesses some capacity to consciously suppress or override the body's own distress signals, at will, when something is deemed important enough to justify it. That sounds almost like a superpower. It is not viewed that way by my colleagues, Ishka says, setting the tablet aside again. It is viewed as deeply dangerous. A body that can be convinced to ignore its own warnings is a body that can be pushed past the point of recovery without ever realizing it has happened, until it is too late. The soldier in the third case, Marcus Doyle, very nearly died the moment his body was finally permitted to stop. His own commanding officers said afterward that he had no memory of the final hour of that engagement, that his mind had simply continued operating on pure momentum, long after any reasonable person would have stopped. I think about that for a long time after Ishka finally leaves the room that evening, the tablet tucked back under her arm, promising to return once my evening assessment is due. I think about Daniel Cole moving through maintenance corridors on a fractured spine, about Clara Whitfield calmly delivering tactical information mid-surgery, about Marcus Doyle holding a defensive position for 6 hours before finally collapsing the instant it was safe to do so. And I think, quietly, uncomfortably, about the itch still sitting in my own legs, the persistent, nagging awareness that somewhere beneath the pain I am not quite admitting to, some part of me is already looking for a reason to get up and move. I do not have to wait very long to find out exactly how right that instinct turns out to be. The alarm cuts through the amber evening light without warning, a deep, pulsing tone that vibrates through the walls themselves, and every calm, quiet rhythm the medical ward has settled into over the past 3 days shatters in an instant. Ishka is at my side within seconds, her earlier composure replaced by something tighter, more focused, her 4 eyes tracking rapid movement outside my door as staff begin rushing past in the corridor. "Stay here," she says, already moving toward the console. "This is not related to your care." "What's happening?" "A fire suppression failure in the adjacent bay," she says, reading something scrolling rapidly across the panel. "Bay 7. There was an equipment malfunction during a procedure. The containment field did not engage properly." Through the transparent wall panel separating my room from the corridor, I can see orange light flickering somewhere down the hall, and even without understanding the alarm system fully, the sound of it alone tells me everything I need to know. Something is burning, and the systems meant to stop it are not working the way they should. Ishka moves toward the door, already reaching for a small device clipped to her belt, and I realize with a jolt that Bay 7 is close enough that the shifting orange light is visible even from here. "How many people are in there?" I ask, already moving my legs off the side of the bed despite every warning Ishka gave me only minutes ago. "That is not your concern," she says without looking back, her voice sharp with urgency now rather than professional distance. "You are still recovering. You need to remain here." "How many?" I ask again, my feet already on the floor, the cold surface a shock against my skin. She hesitates, just long enough to answer. 3 patients. 2 staff members assisting them. I am moving, before I finish processing the number, pulling the thin silver mesh from my ribs in one sharp motion that sends a fresh wave of pain rolling through my side, sharp enough to steal my breath for a moment. Ishka spins back toward me, her eyes wide with something between alarm and disbelief. "What are you doing?" she says, her translator struggling to keep pace with how quickly she is speaking. You cannot remove that. Your wound is not fully sealed. I've had worse, I say, which is not entirely true, but it feels true enough in this moment, with adrenaline already flooding through my system, dulling the sharp edges of pain into something distant and manageable. You are not medical staff, Ishka says, moving to physically block my path toward the door, her slender frame surprisingly firm. You are a patient. You are not trained for this. You will only complicate an already dangerous situation. Then let me help carry someone, I say. You need every set of hands you can get, and I'm already standing. For a moment, something flickers across her face, some internal calculation I cannot fully read, weighing protocol against the very real sound of alarms and the very real orange light flickering down the corridor. Then she steps aside, not because she agrees with me, I realize, but because there simply is not time to argue any further. Stay behind me, she says, already moving. Do exactly as I say. We move fast down the corridor, faster than I expect my body to allow, given how recently I was lying flat on my back, barely able to sit up without wincing. But something in the urgency of the moment seems to override whatever limitations my injuries should be imposing. The orange light grows brighter as we approach Bay 7, thick gray smoke curling out from around the edges of a door that is partially jammed in its frame, stuck halfway open. Inside, the scene is chaos. A containment field flickers weakly along one wall, clearly failing to fully suppress whatever fire has broken out near a bank of medical equipment, and through the haze, I can make out figures moving, coughing, struggling. A Veltari nurse is dragging one patient toward the door, her movements slowed by smoke and panic, while another figure, a patient by the look of the medical restraints still partially attached to his limbs, lies motionless near the far wall, too close to the worst of the flickering flames for comfort. That one, Ishka says, pointing toward the motionless patient, her voice tight. He cannot move himself. The staff cannot reach him. The heat near that section is too intense for our tolerance thresholds. I do not wait for further instruction. I push past the jammed door, ignoring the way the smoke immediately burns at my throat and eyes, ignoring the sharp protest from my ribs with every step, and cross the room toward the motionless figure. He is small compared to me, some alien species I do not recognize, with pale blue skin and multiple limbs folded awkwardly beneath him, clearly unconscious. I get my arms under him, feeling the fresh tear of pain along my side as I lift, a sensation like something hot splitting open beneath the skin, and for a moment, my vision swims dangerously at the edges. I push through it anyway, because stopping now means leaving him here, and that is simply not an option my body seems willing to consider, regardless of what my ribs think about the decision. Behind me, I hear Ishka shouting something toward the failing containment field, her voice sharp with command even through the chaos, and another figure, one of the other staff members, rushes forward to help redirect a stream of suppression foam toward the worst of the flickering flames. I carry the unconscious patient back toward the door, my legs unsteady beneath me, smoke thick enough now that I can barely see more than a few feet ahead, my lungs burning with every breath. The heat presses against my back as I move, and somewhere behind me I hear a sharp crack, something giving way, followed by a burst of heat that pushes me the last few steps through the door and out into the corridor, where the air is finally clear enough to breathe properly again. I set the unconscious patient down, as gently as I can manage, my arms shaking now, adrenaline beginning to ebb just enough to let the full weight of what I have just done catch up with me. My side is a solid mass of fire, blood soaking through the thin fabric of my medical gown, where the wound has clearly reopened, and my legs feel unsteady beneath me, in a way they did not just minutes ago. But the patient is breathing. Someone kneels beside him, almost instantly, checking vitals, calling out something urgent toward the rest of the staff still emerging from Bay 7. Ishka appears through the smoke moments later, half supporting the nurse who had been struggling with the first patient, both of them coughing, both of them safe. Behind them, the last of the staff emerge as well, and the containment field finally stabilizes, the orange light dimming steadily as suppression systems belatedly catch up with the fire they were meant to prevent in the first place. It is only once everyone is clear, once the immediate danger has passed, that Ishka's eyes find me across the corridor, and her expression shifts from urgent focus to something closer to horror.
"You are bleeding,"
she says, already moving toward me. I look down at myself and realize she is right. The fabric across my ribs now soaked dark. The pain finally breaking through the adrenaline in full force, now that there is nothing left urgent enough to hold it back. My legs choose that exact moment to stop cooperating, and the corridor tilts sharply sideways. Ishka catches me before I hit the floor, her slender arms surprisingly strong, lowering me carefully rather than letting me fall. "Someone get a stabilization unit," she calls out, her voice cutting through the remaining chaos in the corridor with unmistakable authority. The last thing I see clearly before the edges of my vision start to blur is a small crowd of medical staff gathering around us. Some of them the very same nurses who spent the past 3 days finding excuses to walk past my door, all of them now staring with an entirely different kind of expression, something between shock and disbelief and, unmistakably, awe. "He removed his own monitoring equipment," someone says quietly nearby, their voice hushed like they are reciting something they cannot quite believe they are witnessing firsthand. "He went into an active fire with a partially open surgical wound. He is barely conscious now, and his vitals are still stronger than they should be," another voice adds. "Look at the readings." Ishka's face hovers above mine, closer now, her 4 eyes wide with something that looks like a mixture of anger and relief, and something else entirely. Something I do not have time to fully identify before the darkness finally pulls me under. "You absolute fool," I hear her say, right at the edge of consciousness, though there is no real anger left in the words by the time they reach me, only something far softer underneath, something that sounds almost like it might be respect. When I wake again, the light in the room is that pale morning blue, and my body feels like it has been run through some kind of engine and put back together slightly wrong. The mesh across my ribs has been replaced, thicker this time, glowing a steadier shade of green, and when I shift slightly to test how bad the damage really is, the pain is duller than I expect, wrapped in something that must be a stronger dose of whatever they use for pain management here. Ishka is seated in the chair beside my bed, and from the look of her, the deep shadows beneath her eyes, and the faint dullness to her usually reflective skin, I would guess she has not left that chair in a very long time. "You are awake," she says quietly, straightening immediately. "How long this time?" 14 hours. She studies me carefully, her eyes tracing over the readouts on the wall panel, before returning to my face. "Your wound required surgical repair. You lost a significant amount of blood. By every measure my medical training provides, you should not currently be conscious, let alone speaking clearly." "Guess I'm just stubborn." That is precisely the word 3 separate staff members used to describe you last night, Ishka says, and there is something different in her voice now, something that was not there in our earlier conversations, some of the guarded professional distance finally worn away. Along with several other words I am choosing not to repeat, most of them concerning your complete disregard for your own safety. "Is he okay? The patient I pulled out?" "He is stable," Ishka says. "He will make a full recovery." His physician credits that recovery directly to how quickly he was removed from the heat exposure in that room. Another few minutes and the outcome would likely have been very different. Something in my chest loosens slightly at that, a tension I did not fully realize I was carrying until it eased. "Good." Ishka is quiet for a moment, watching me with an expression I cannot quite place. Something thoughtful, something almost reluctant, like she is working up to a question she is not entirely sure she wants the answer to. "Why did you do it?" she finally asks. "You were a patient. Injured, barely stable. You had absolutely no obligation to enter that room." I think about the question for a long moment before answering, because it deserves an honest answer rather than a quick one. "Because there was someone in there who couldn't get out on his own," I say finally. "And I was standing there, capable of moving, even if I probably shouldn't have been. Once I knew that, staying in my bed just wasn't really an option anymore. Not one I could live with anyway, even knowing the cost to yourself. I didn't really think about the cost in the moment, I admit. That's sort of the problem, if you want to call it that. In the moment, the only thing that matters is the person who needs help. Everything else, the pain, the risk, whatever consequences come after, all of that gets pushed somewhere in the back of your mind. It's still there. You just don't let yourself listen to it until later." Ishka leans back slightly, absorbing that, her 4 eyes distant for a moment, as though she is turning the words over carefully, comparing them against everything she has read in those 3 prior case files. That is exactly the pattern described in each of the other documented cases, she says quietly. Daniel Cole did not consider the cost to his fractured spine before assisting with that coolant leak. Clara Whitfield did not consider her own surgical vulnerability before delivering that warning. Marcus Doyle did not consider his own survival before holding that position for 6 hours. She pauses. In every case, the well-being of others became more urgent, in the moment, than the well-being of the self. Is that so hard to understand? For my people, yes, Ishka says, and there is no judgment in the words, only genuine reflection. We are taught from a very young age that the self must be preserved first, because a caregiver, who has broken themselves, is no longer capable of caring for anyone else. It is considered the responsible position, the wise position. What you describe, what all 4 of these cases describe, runs directly counter to everything my training tells me should produce good outcomes. But it did produce a good outcome, I say. That patient is alive because someone was willing to accept the cost. Yes, Ishka admits, and that is precisely what unsettles my colleagues so deeply, and I will admit, unsettles me as well. Something that should not work, by every framework I have been trained to trust, continues to work anyway, every single time. It makes me wonder how much of what I believe to be simply true about medicine and survival is actually only true for my own species, rather than universally true at all. The door slides open before I can respond, and Doran, the senior physician who visited on my 2nd day, under the flimsiest of pretexts, steps inside without waiting for an invitation. This time, she does not bother pretending to have a reason. She simply walks to the foot of my bed, studies me for a long moment, with an intensity that would be uncomfortable if I did not already have some sense of what was behind it, and finally speaks. I have reviewed the incident report from Bay 7, she says, along with your full medical history from the past 4 days. I would like to ask you something directly, human, if you will permit it. Go ahead. Was this a singular event? She asks, or is this simply how your species behaves under pressure, as a general rule? I think about Daniel Cole in the maintenance corridors, about Clara Whitfield calmly delivering intelligence mid-surgery, about Marcus Doyle holding his position for 6 hours before finally collapsing, and about the simple, unavoidable truth that when I saw someone who needed help and I was capable of providing it, there had never really been a decision to make at all. It's pretty general, I say honestly. I'm not special. I think if you asked most of us, we'd probably tell you something similar. We're not particularly strong compared to a lot of the species I've heard about out here. We're not especially resilient in any measurable biological sense, from what I understand. What we are is stubborn about the wrong things at exactly the wrong times, and somehow that keeps working out, more often than it probably should. Doran's eyes narrow slightly, considering that, and she exchanges a brief glance with Ishka before speaking again. This information will need to be formally added to the growing body of research regarding your species, she says. It has significant implications, particularly for future medical protocols involving human patients aboard our vessels. Standard sedation and containment procedures may require substantial revision. You're telling me you might need a different rulebook, just for us. It is beginning to appear that way, yes, Doran says, something that might almost be dry humor, threading through her otherwise clinical tone. 4 documented cases is no longer a coincidence. It is a pattern. And patterns, in medicine, cannot be safely ignored, regardless of how inconvenient they may be to accommodate. She leaves shortly after, promising to return once the formal report is finalized, and the room falls quiet again, just Ishka and I, and the low, steady hum of the ship around us. You know, Ishka says after a long moment, when you first arrived, I was afraid of you, not of your species specifically, but of what your readings meant. Severe pain, calmly ignored. It felt like watching someone lie to me, over and over, in a way I had no tools to challenge. And now? She considers the question carefully before answering, her 4 eyes settling on me with something that has clearly shifted since that very first conversation. Something warmer, something closer to genuine curiosity rather than wary alarm. Now I think I understand it a little better, she says. It is not dishonesty. It is simply a different set of priorities than the ones my species is built around. You are not lying about the pain. You are choosing, consciously, to place something else above it, at least until the moment passes, and there is nothing left requiring that choice. That's a pretty generous way of putting it. Perhaps, Ishka says, though I suspect it is also, simply, the truth. Over the following days, as my body continues healing, at a pace that keeps the wall panel readouts flickering, with cautious amber warnings nobody fully trusts, the visits from other staff do not stop, but they change in character. Nurses stop by openly now, no longer inventing thin excuses, simply introducing themselves, asking questions with genuine curiosity, rather than nervous fascination. Doran returns twice more, each time with more detailed questions, clearly building something larger than a simple report. On the morning I am finally cleared to leave the medical ward, Ishka walks with me toward the transport bay, where a shuttle waits to take me back to human-controlled territory, my ribs still tender beneath my shirt, but steady enough now to move without pain stealing my breath. I updated your file this morning, she says as we walk, before you were discharged. Another warning for the next unlucky nurse assigned to a human patient? No, she says, and there is something almost like amusement in her translated voice now, softened considerably from the careful, guarded tone she carried in that very first conversation. I removed the warning language entirely. I replaced it with something closer to an observation. What did you write? She stops walking, turning to face me fully, her 4 eyes steady and clear in the bright corridor lighting. I wrote that human patients should not be underestimated, and should not be treated as fragile, simply because their pain readings suggest they ought to be. I wrote that their apparent disregard for their own safety is not recklessness, but rather a deeply held value system that consistently produces positive outcomes for everyone around them, even when it comes at significant personal cost. She pauses. I wrote that any staff member assigned to care for a human patient in the future should expect exactly what I experienced. Someone who will insist they feel fine, directly through an injury, that would incapacitate almost anyone else. Someone who will find a reason to act, rather than wait, the moment they believe someone else needs them to. I do not have an immediate response to that, something tightening pleasantly in my chest instead, and Ishka seems to understand the silence for what it is. There is already talk, she continues, of formally studying this pattern across a wider sample of human patients, given how consistent it has proven across every documented case so far. I suspect, Ethan Marsh, that you will not be the last human whose file causes an entire medical staff to abandon their assigned duties simply to catch a glimpse through a doorway. Is that a compliment or a warning? With your species, Ishka says, something that might genuinely be a smile shaping the mandibles of her otherwise unreadable face, I am beginning to suspect it may simply be both, inseparably, every single time. We reach the transport bay, and I turn to face her one last time before boarding, extending a hand out of habit, before remembering that handshakes probably mean nothing to a species with 4 eyes and mandibles instead of a mouth. She studies the gesture for a moment, clearly unfamiliar with it, then reaches out with 2 long fingers, and mirrors the motion as best she can, something clumsy and genuine in the attempt. Thank you, I tell her, for everything, for staying, for explaining. For not giving up on trying to understand something that probably didn't make much sense to you at all. Thank you, she says in return, for giving me a reason to question everything I believed I understood about how a body is supposed to respond to pain. I do not think I will look at any patient quite the same way again, human or otherwise. I board the shuttle, and as the doors close behind me, I catch one last glimpse of Ishka standing in the transport bay, watching until the shuttle finally pulls away, her 4 eyes following me long after there is nothing left to see. Somewhere behind her, deep within the archives of that medical vessel, my file now sits alongside 3 others, a small but growing collection of stories about a species that never quite learned to listen when its own body told it to stop. And somewhere across that ship, I imagine, another nurse is already whispering the story to a colleague who has not heard it yet, already wondering, quietly, what it might be like to meet the 5th chapter for herself.